So I am so excited today to have Daphne it's Edgren, correct?
Yep, you got it.
Thank you. Daphne's joining us. She is the host of the SARC podcast, Rise to Face the Sun, which came out about a month ago now, Daphne.
Yeah, it was May 29th that it first episodes.
SARC is an organization focused on bringing awareness and research to sarcoma, not specifically childhood or pediatric sarcoma or adult sarcoma. They look at all areas of sarcoma, and Daphne's focus has really been on the adolescent young adult experience, correct?
Yeah.
And her podcast is really creating space for the voices of lived patient experiences, which I thought was so important and like what we do in this group, because so many of us are here sharing our experiences with others and can personally attest to the value of those connections. So when I heard that Daphne was focusing specifically on lived experiences, I had to check out her podcast. It's been amazing so far. She's had some young adults and caregivers with unique sarcoma experiences. And she this week released her first interview with a DSRCT patient, which if you're a podcast girly like myself, you'll know that there's a lot of cancer podcasts out there. There's even a good number of sarcoma podcasts out there. But as far as podcasts specific to DSRCT, hearing DSRCT patient stories, there's not that many. So not only is Daphne talking to Val Stevenson from our groups this week, but then she has, I think, another DSRCT patient story in this series. So I'm so excited to introduce Daphne to our community and also to introduce the DSRCT community to Daphne. And I've never done an interview before, so we're all learning together, but we're just going to get started. Daphne, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so just to kind of give everybody an idea, so I'm the host of the podcast that Laura was just mentioning. Also, just to give an idea of like what I do is like my actual job is I'm the senior medical writer for sarcoma neuro-oncology, pediatric neuro-oncology, and pediatric hematology oncology over at Northwestern. I'm a part-time Master's of Public Health student at Harvard, and then I hope in the future to continue research into sarcoma. So like while I do, like medical writing for, other types of cancers, sarcoma is my ultimate interest. And yeah, just to give you an idea of medical writing is basically we're writing the research studies that people here might be extra familiar with, maybe not, but yeah, that's what we write. So yeah.
Well, thank you. And you explained that much better than I could. But I really would love for you to kind of start at the beginning of what brought you to becoming a medical writer and working with finding a special interest in sarcoma. Because you started out in Chicago, right, in art school?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I think that's the thing that surprises everybody the most. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it surprises me the most when I tell people no one seems super surprised, but yeah, I guess I'll start from the beginning, which was for me when I was going to go to college in Chicago. So kind of what happened is I was born and raised in Colorado, actually. And I moved to Chicago to go to this art school called School of the Arts to Chicago. And if you're not familiar with what it is, it's totally fine. It's the school of the museum here with the lines at the front. And it was in Ferris Bueller's Day Off where they go and they look at the pointillism painting and they get kind of like cross-eyed looking at it sort of thing. So it's the school of that. So anyway, so I've been an artist forever. And when I got to Chicago, long story short, I couldn't breathe. It was really weird. And I remember telling my family, I was like, I can't breathe. Like this is weird. And it's like at 18, I had like some medical issues in the past. Nothing like this though. I was a runner. Like you know, it was really bizarre. And I can't breathe. And my parents, they like were not concerned, which was really interesting. They actually went back home to Colorado, and I started like coughing up blood. Like I couldn't see straight. Like I was seeing cross-eyed, and I was like, all I was 18. I was like, is my blood sugar low? Like people talk about that. So like I remember eating a donut, like trying to like feel better, and I remember just being like, oh my God, like I don't know, like I feel like just awful. And I actually started losing so much air, like I couldn't talk. We had our first class, and I remember being like, oh my God, like I can't talk. This is really weird because the air couldn't come up. So finally, I actually called the EMTs, my friend called 911. The EMTs came, and they didn't even check my vitals because they were like, oh, you're probably just anxious. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. And they're like, well, you know, why don't you take a taxi to the hospital? And I was like, okay. And they're like, because you need like health insurance. It's gonna be expensive to take the ambulance. I remember thinking like, it's a really weird thing to say, but I didn't know like anything. So I was like, yeah, I think you need insurance, which I totally had. But anyway, so I took a taxi to the hospital, and they finally took my oxygen, and they like freaked out, and they were like, oh my God, it's like at 50%. They're like, how are you walking? And I was like, oh, I'm so out of it right now. I don't know. Anyways, basically I ended up getting diagnosed with acute respiratory distress syndrome. And like the next day I was put on life support, medically induced coma. I was put on the lung transplant list. I had a 2% chance of survival. They thought I was going to have like brain damage, which checks out because I had a really low oxygen. And yeah, so anyways, so I was in a coma for a week, and I was on the 2 life support systems. I was on I was intubated, and then they put me on a tracheotomy, but I had an ECMO, which is like a modern day version of the iron lung. And so that was really difficult to be on, but they ended up waking me up, and they wanted me to walk on ECMO to see if I can get things moving, and like in my lungs. And I ended up doing that. I ended up getting a lung transplant, and actually recovered pretty well. I was only in the hospital for a month, inpatient. And after I left, I remember thinking, I just really liked the people. And I remember thinking, I don't know, when you're that young, you don't really have like, you don't really know your thought processes. You're just like, I like this. And so I went back to art school the next semester, but I was like, I don't know, like I really liked the hospital. And I basically asked for a job. I asked one of the people on my team, I was like, can I have a job here? Like I walked into the hospital, and I like made art pieces for people. And I said, can I work here? Because like my parents really wanted me to go to art school still. And I was like, I don't know. And so I ended up going to art school, and then I got a wet lab research assistant position at Northwestern. This is actually that's where I was hospitalized at, which is cool because it kind of goes full circle. And I ended up doing really well in that job and all of my other subsequent jobs. And I've worked in a lot of different areas. So I worked in thoracic surgery at that time. So it was, I was just a research assistant. So I was just working in the lab, but I was also doing medical illustration and operating room cinematography for the lung transplant team there. And then, let's see, then I ended up going over to U Chicago to do research in the ICU. And that's when I first started like interacting with patients. And then I moved to New York City, where I did some coursework in the pre-med post-baccalaureate over at Columbia. And I was working at Columbia in anesthesiology. And then I worked in somnology, which is sleep medicine, for a while. And then I worked in, let's see what after that. Oh, that was neurology after that, which was very interesting because I learned a lot about neuromuscular disorders. And then pediatrics hit because I really like kids. I worked in allergy immunology. And then, so basically I climbed up in all these different fields, and I never thought I was going to be a medical writer. I didn't know that was a thing. To be quite honest with you, I was like, what's that? And I actually applied for a different job. So I was going to move back here with my now husband because we didn't like New York City. New York City is great, but it just not forever. So I was like, we should go to Chicago. and I interviewed for a position here at the Northwestern Cancer Center. And they're like, you'd be a great medical writer. And I was like, I don't know. I went to art school. I mean, we can try, but I'd read so many protocols at this point. So I was like, it's not, I don't think it'd be too far off. And so they interviewed me for it, and I sent them some of my writing samples. And they're like, yeah, you'd be great. And so I was like, okay. And so I got that job that I'm at now. And going into sarcoma, so I specifically went in thinking I'm going to really like neuro-oncology because I'd worked in neurology. And I that's what I thought I was going to like. And so I asked my boss, I said, okay, 2 things I want to work in. If this is available, I would like to work on neuro-oncology, and I would like to work in pediatric oncology because I really like kids. And she said, oh yeah, that's totally fine because the person before you, actually that's what they had. So here you can write for those areas. But also we need some for sarcoma because the sarcoma team had just started over at Northwestern. So it's about 6 years now. And I've been at Northwestern for 2 years. So basically what happened is there's a few different sparks. So like when you work in like medicine, there's a lot of different departments, and they all attract different personalities because of what you're studying. And as I'd worked in all these different areas, I've come across so many different personalities. My main goal at one point is I wanted to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. And I remember I was working for chief of anesthesiology over at Columbia. And I was like, I want to be cardiothoracic surgeon. And he was like, you are not a cardiothoracic surgeon. And I was like, what? Yes, I am. Like, she was like, you don't have the personality for it. And I was like, oh, really? You guys are asking for straight A's and volunteer work and great MCAT scores, and now you want personality? And and it was just like the weirdest thing. And he was like, no, let me tell you. And it was nothing bad. It was just, he was just telling me this is what cardiothoracic surgeons are like, not in a bad way. I just want to be very clear. But it was just like there was a different type of personality to it, very like forward and just in a ways that I'm not. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm not a cardiothoracic surgeon. And it was really weird because I left that conversation thinking, oh man, but I have no idea that like I have like what's my interest in medicine then? And I felt really bad because I was like, oh my God, I don't have any draw to anything else. I think it was just because I almost had a lung transplant one time, and I recorded them when I was young, which is what everybody had been telling me. But I was like, I don't know. So I felt really weird. And I remember thinking it has to do with personality. So that had been in my head for several years. And I thought maybe medicine's not for me, even though I kept like working in research. And so that kind of comes back to this whole sarcoma thing where I get on a call with the head of the sarcoma program here, the director, and also his another doctor he's working with. And I just thought, I like these guys. They're really nice. And very their personalities are very like tame and very like kind of calm. And I kind of liked that. And one thing I specifically, so I was writing the protocol and I find the science interesting. That's a whole nother part of it. But I remember I actually went to, his name is Dr. Pollack, the director of the sarcoma program here. I went to a lecture at the beginning of my medical writing job. And he was talking about ASCO from, was it 2024, 2025, whatever they had just done. And he basically went up and he said, yeah, we haven't found anything new. That was his talk, versus everybody else was talking, really fancy stuff like, oh, ASCO, guess what we found in prostate cancer? And, they have all these like fancy slides. And when he went up there, he had nothing, which is really interesting because I think the way he still was able to navigate that, very short time he had up there. And I remember just thinking, I think I like sarcoma. I love the way he handled that. So it's kind of weird because it had to do with personalities a bit. And I just thought, I don't know. I have this weird feeling this is the place I belong. So that's originally how I got into sarcoma and like medical writing and stuff. So that was a long-winded way of like saying that. I'll kind of stop there, so I'll let you ask your other questions. But
No,
yeah.
well, we kind of you went through some of the questions, and that's great. But one of the things I feel like you kind of went past that I heard in your other interviews that I want you to talk about is like how you said that you had the ECMO procedure when you went through your ARDS emergency, which for those of you guys that aren't familiar with that health complication, that is a life-threatening event. You might have heard her say, you know, she was told 2% chance of survival. So I also thought that was your story really was, I was drawn to it for our community also, because a lot of people in our community are told something, and statistically, that doesn't necessarily reflect their lived experience, right? And so your lived experience is not a reflection of the statistics for the diagnosis that you faced. And I think that's an important part of hope and the way that we share hope with each other. So, but I think that you didn't mention one of the things that you were the first person in Chicago to walk on ECMO, or in Illinois to walk on. So walking on ECMO, what ultimately caused you to turn around and get out of the hospital in a month versus having a lung transplant, potentially was that new, never done before kind of thing. And that had to be impactful on your perspective as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, what's interesting is a lot of this information I didn't actually know until like after, because they're not going to, I think they don't tell, especially if you're inpatient and you're hooked up to all these machines. And I was like non-verbal because I had either a tube down my throat, or later on they switched it to a trach. So I couldn't talk, and I was getting a little bit of hospital psychosis, which that's a whole nother story. So they didn't tell me then. They only told me when I got better at the very end. They're like, oh, wow, can't believe you made it through. And I just thought like, whoa, I didn't know it was like that bad. Like, I mean, like I did, but I think when you're 18, and because I did know I was dying, but I think hearing the percentage was kind of weird, because then when you come out of it, you're like, whoa, that was bizarre. Like, because I think you kind of go into survival mode, especially like emotionally. I think everybody like does it differently. And I think it also depends on like your environment, and also like even small things, but like what you're eating, what you're not eating, who you're seeing, who you're not seeing, like how people interact with you, how they don't. Like it changes like the entire way you receive that information. And so I did know it, but the way I handled it was, I mean, being very honest, like, you know, I want to say like, yeah, I was so hopeful. And I was like this, you know, I was just like, no, I'm going to like beat this or whatnot. I didn't have that vocabulary. Like I didn't. I mean, very honestly, I just thought like, oh, like this is it. And I remember.
And you were also 18 years old.
I was 18. And like, you know, what was really weird is to describe the experience. This is how I felt. I remember up until like I got that sick, I had been doing art since I was like, oh my gosh, since I was making memories. Like I was like, we even had an art room at home. Like it was like a whole thing. And so I had all these plans. I was thinking in my head, like, you didn't think about what you're going to do like in the next hour. Like you're like I was always planning. I'm still like that today. But I remember when I was in that state, and I remember what it was. I was in bed, and I was still awake from my I was awake from my coma, and the doctors came in to actually talk to my mom. They weren't really talking to me, not in a bad way. They just were, I was tapped out. I didn't really want them to talk to me anyways. They were explaining, because they were taking x-rays every day, and they were like, yeah, like her lungs are like not getting better. And I just kind of knew at that point, because they were saying stuff, but like I wasn't hearing them, but I knew what they were saying. And I was like, oh, this is it. And I remember just thinking like, I had no thought about the next hour or like the next second or anything like that. And it was, I've never experienced that since. And I think that's what I did, is like, there was no like formal like sentences or anything in my head, like I'm going to get out of this or anything like that. I just kind of accepted it. And what I did is I watched this movie. It's an indie movie. If you've never seen it before, err with caution because it's a very sad one. But I watched this movie called Death of a Superhero, and it's about this boy who's my age who gets cancer, and before he dies, he wants to get his first kiss. And so the reason why it's called Death of Superhero is because he writes comic books, and it's a sad ending that the boy passes away. But I remember it was so weird because it had been on my list for a really long time, and it wasn't because I didn't not watch it because of the plot. I just hadn't watched it yet. And I remember thinking like, oh, this is a good time to like watch that movie, which is kind of bizarre way of thinking about things. But yeah, I watched that, and then I don't know, maybe I was panicking, but I felt kind of numb. And I think what happened is very honestly, the staff that was treating me was really nice to me. They were really nice to me. I remember one thing that they allowed me to do is I wasn't allowed to eat or drink. I had a feeding tube. But I was like, oh my God, like I need some taste in my mouth. And so one of the nurses, he said he wasn't allowed to do this. And I was like, yeah, no kidding. He allowed me to swish soda in my mouth and then take my like canister and it would suck. And so I was getting grape and orange soda. And so sometimes my canister was like this bright orange soda, or sometimes it was like brown because I was doing all these different like tastings. And he was totally not allowed to do that, but it made my experience so much better. And it was like weird things like that. There's another nurse who was like, do you want me to like shave your legs or something? Because I was, when you shave your legs and the hair starts growing out, like you're really uncomfortable, like laying in bed or against sheets, just like little things like that. And I was like, yeah, I didn't think about that. And so I remember like sitting in a chair, which was really hard to do. It was like a workout for me to sit in a chair. And I remember she was shaving my legs, and I remember getting back in the bed, and I was like, oh my gosh, it just feels so much better. And it was just like little things like that made the experience like a lot nicer. And I think that's how it happened. But like actually walking on ECMO, again, I didn't know I was the first person, and it makes sense now because they were holding my ECMO in because it goes into your neck. Ooh, it's spooky to even think about. I'm so glad I didn't know certain things. I remember they were like holding it, and I walked for 30 minutes, and I'd been bedridden for 2 weeks at that point. So I'm really surprised I was able to do that. And so I remember doing that, and I was so exhausted afterwards. But I think, to be honest with you, I actually don't know the science behind how that actually helps. I never really looked into it, which is weird. I never really looked into it, but I think it was the act of feeling like I was getting better. Like people were treating me like, okay, well, we can get up now. I was like, okay, well, I can get up now. So I think it was things like that helped me. But yeah, does that answer the question? It's kind of long-winded.
No, yes, it does. And I mean, it's something that's familiar to our community as well, because if for DSRCT patients, most often it involves a really major resection surgery to remove all of the disease that typically will fill up a lot of the abdomen in the majority of presentations. And so those surgeries can be 10, 12, 20 plus hour long surgeries, and with a lot of abdominal wounds and drains. And so patients come out of that surgery, usually in the ICU with a tube down their throat, with a bunch of staples or stitches in their abdomen and drains everywhere. And then the nurse looks at them or mom or dad and is like, okay, time to get them out of bed.
Yeah.
But there is actual data and medical studies that show that being ambulatory as soon as possible after that major surgery really is connected to the outcomes and the recovery. So it's something that we talk about all the time, is the importance of getting up and walking as soon as possible, and walking as every day. I think walking it's just our bodies are meant to be in motion and active, and it's part of how our systems work. But I think it's just remarkable that you had such a unique like experience that really, I think for someone especially in the newer to this journey that has just been diagnosed with cancer, it's really one of the most shocking and devastating things is kind of facing the fact that your life has been forever changed by this diagnosis, right? And your story is a reflection of your life was forever changed by that medical event. But also not that's not a negative statement, right? For you, it's defined your career, it's driven you to have interest in specific experiences, and because of what you went through medically, that helps you really relate to the AYA population and sarcoma. A lot of the people in our group, we do have a lot of AYA people, not today maybe, but a lot of them are also caregivers. And so I think one of the things in your story I heard a couple of times was that there were times when you were not even there. You were checked out, just literally staying alive in your body. And so your caregivers were the ones having those conversations. And there's a whole different, there's kind of two different perspectives. And I'm sure that you maybe have seen that in your podcast as well, right?
Yeah, no, there's definitely two different perspectives. And I think that's why, because first AYA, I think to me, it was just, first of all, like I am of that age group and I was of that age group when that happened to me. And so I think spreading awareness about sarcoma, like having a younger crowd also helps in that respect too. So I kind of cheers it on like multiple fronts. But then also what's nice is then you have some like older generations because you can welcome in like caregivers too. And there's also this other perspective. So it's you have a lot of like different perspectives on this. But I think welcoming caregivers in is really important because it's weird because like I wasn't actually in that position. So I think for me, it was information for me to understand like what their side of it was. But also I think it's helpful for people whose family members get diagnosed because there's a difference between like, I've got this because it's like my diagnosis kind of thing. And then there's a difference between the other person being like, oh my God, like there's absolutely nothing I can do when someone's like experiencing toxicities or like has made a decision that maybe like I wouldn't have chosen, or like there's a lot of, because you think like from the outside, like, well, I have a lot of perspective because I see you. And then it's like, but then you're also not in that person's like body too. So it kind of creates this dual, it can create like tension, but it can also create, some light on both sides. So anyways, that's why I did the caregiver thing. And also what was really cool is I was thinking mostly parents. And then I ended up having a call with Allison Silberman a few months back. She's the CEO of Stupid Cancer, which actually her episode's coming out this upcoming Monday. And she was like, I have a really close relationship with sarcoma. And I was like, really? She's like, yeah, my brother passed away from it. I was like, what? I was like, I didn't know this. And so then I just thought, oh, this is actually perfect because we don't really get a lot of, siblings. And it happened, many years ago. So she was very comfortable talking about it. But yeah, I even got like a sibling on, which I thought was, it's like, man, you don't really get this perspective very often. So, yeah, so we have that. And then, yeah, we have Valerie Stevenson. And then we had another mom of Natasha Allen who spoke as well. So, yeah.
So what made you decide to do a podcast first? So you're doing it for your capstone, for your master's, correct?
Yeah.
Master's of Public Health. So what made you decide to do a podcast?
Oh, okay. So what I will start off by saying is like I didn't think like I'm going to do a podcast. Like it kind of grew into that. But well, first I decided I wanted to do sarcoma. And I remember going up to Pollock and saying, hey, I want to like do this in sarcoma. And he was like, oh, great. So he got me in touch with SARC like immediately. And that's how I got in touch with a few people that worked there, and we started, talking about ideas about like potential awareness campaign. Because originally what this was going to be is it was going to be like, I kind of came up with this social media awareness campaign. I had never done an awareness campaign before, but I was like, let's do something like this, because I feel like with my art background, maybe we could do something pretty cool. Do you know how hard it is to do a social media awareness campaign? I was like, I like to think pretty big, and I was like, I know ALS had that ice bucket challenge quite a few years back. I remember how big that got because ALS is not super common, but everybody was like doing this ice bucket challenge, and then all of a sudden everybody knows about ALS. And I was like, that's so cool. So I originally was going to do that, and it was always centered around like patient interviews. I will say that. I was always like, well, we got to interview patients, because as someone who used to be a research coordinator interviewing patients all the time, that's, where I was. So I was like, we got to do interview with patients. And then slowly I started realizing, I was like, I don't know. If this doesn't work, there's nothing that like stays online. Like you might have like the beginning of a spark with this, but then it doesn't really, I don't know if it would provide information, because that's a risk. Like that was too big of a risk. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. And so I remember thinking like, let's do interviews. And I was not thinking podcast at all. Because I also didn't know what like kind of like resources we had. And I think we were just talking with somebody, we had a meeting, and somebody from one of the like subset sarcoma foundations was like, why don't you do a podcast? And I was like, a podcast? It kind of spooked me a little bit. I was like, I only listen to them. I don't really interview people. And then I thought, well, I don't know. Like I did it like every day, like for many years. I interviewed people. I just didn't really have the camera on. And I was like, well, technically what I studied in art school was cinematography. So I was like, well, I do kind of know a few things. Not that I'm like editing it or anything, but I'm not uncomfortable with, recording or anything. And so, and I just thought, okay, this actually is much better because it could be online forever. People can access it. And we get to actually interview people's like full stories. Because something I didn't like about this like awareness campaign social media thing is you kind of share a snippet of somebody's story, and then I don't know what it feels, but it feels like it doesn't really capture very much. And then you might post something, and then that person would be like, it's not really like my story. Like that's such a swell part about it. And I just thought, okay, if we're not going to be doing this for very long, and we're not going to be bringing that many people, we might as well, do an actual proper like interview. So that's how it started. It wasn't, I think it was interesting. At one point I was like, oh my God, we're doing a podcast. So that's how it kind of came about.
Well, so you've talked about your being a medical writer, and before that you did like some care coordination. So maybe talk about what being a medical writer actually involves. And when you say that you write research trials, like help us, the community here that maybe has been on the side of being involved in a clinical trial or has read research trials that have been reported in medical literature. Where does your role fall into that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Okay, so first, I think it's good to kind of explain how research is different than being a patient in the clinic. When you're like a patient in the clinic, and I also know it's because of like how doctors treat patients, there's already established guidelines, and you can kind of fall outside of these guidelines because they're not trying to establish anything except trying to get you better. So we're not trying to report any findings or anything like that. When you get to research, it is very structured and it is pretty strict. And I've known a lot of patients get really frustrated with it because it is really tough to be part of a research study. I can't imagine what it's like to be part of like an oncology research study, especially with like medications, because it's more intense than some other stuff I've worked on. Even some pediatric trials I've worked on. I've worked on like phase 1s and 2s with it. They're just really crazy. But the reason they're like that is because we're trying to collect like the purest information possible so we can apply this to a lot of different kinds of people. And so that's why we have, what we call like a protocol and a consent form, and like we have all these forms and whatnot. So the consent form is just so that people who are participating in the trials of patients know what they're getting themselves into. And it's like reviewed by a, the IRB, and it's, it's highly regulated type of stuff. And then you get to the protocol, which is like the meat of the study. It's kind of like the Bible that like the entire study team refers to. So whenever you have like someone come in who's a nurse, a research coordinator, a doctor, pretty much anybody who is treating you, I mean, assuming you're not part of multiple research studies, and you shouldn't be, but anyways, just assuming you're just, following the rules, and you're just doing that one, they're all reading the protocol. And a really good way to describe it is it's basically like a recipe, but you have to follow it really precisely. So what I do is I write those protocols, and how it kind of goes is it's like the doctor, or we call the principal investigator, comes up with this idea. So it's like they're coming up with this idea for like, I don't know, like a new like food item or something. And they basically take it to you, and it can be as, like organized or unorganized as possible. And they're like, hey, can you make this into a protocol, or whatever. And so basically what I do is I write it out kind of like a recipe. It's like, what are all the things you need? What are all the steps you need to follow? Like, how do you ensure that things keep at, actually, I was going to use temperatures as like an example, but like that's actually a legit thing. Is like there's certain medications that need to be kept at certain temperatures and things like that. But protocol can get really dense because these are like 100-some pages like documents, and you have all these like different sections about like treatment plans, who's eligible for the study, the study procedures table, which I think a lot of patients are probably more familiar with than what they realize, because you follow the study procedures table. You're told to come in these certain visits or whatnot. So, when I say that as a medical writer, we write all of that, that's literally what I mean. Is we write all of it. Now we have a lot of like, oversight, and we have a lot of people on these teams, and the, doctors, the FDA, IRB, everybody's looking at these protocols. You have the companies going through and like nitpicking, like any little, I've had people nitpick extra spaces. Like that's how intense it gets. And sometimes like it's just like these documents are like, they're highly tailored. We even get into formatting stuff, so people like don't get super overwhelmed by too much content on one page kind of thing. So it even comes down to like what it looks like visually for the study team, so they can follow it well. So it gets to that intensive like details. And so as medical writer, we write that, and really we send it back and forth between the PI and ourselves, say like, is this good? Like, is this what you intended? No, okay, so we rewrite it. We also work with statisticians. We don't do stats. That's the one thing we don't do. We have a statistician who goes through and basically, does the stats to make sure that we have enough, patients, like enough sample size. Are the objectives, like the main wants of the studies, are they going to lead to the data outcome that we want? We have a whole like safety team that looks at like, safety of whatever we're trying to do, whether that's a combination of medications or if it's a new medication for new indication. Basically using like a new medicine for cancer that hasn't been applied to before, that kind of scenario. And so, and basically then after the PI is saying, okay, this is good, we ended up sending it out to, what have you. There's different steps, but we have like the scientific review committee look at it, which are basically a bunch of other PIs. Then we have, what was it next? Oh, well, the companies before that, and it can kind of change a little bit, but then sometimes the FDA comes in to look at it, and the IRB, and then it can take like over a year to get these studies approved, or even like working, up and running if they get to that point. So I've also had studies that just don't come to fruition for lots of different reasons. But yeah, that's what being a medical writer is. It's the highly technical documents that are like the core of your research. But yeah.
Well, and I think it's really important perspective, just from the patient perspective, to understand how many people are involved in designing research, designing trials, publishing research. Like, it seems from, you get diagnosed and you're like, why is there not more? And it's like, for me, it helped me to really understand how very much goes into everything. Not, I mean, and we know that even in the hospital. But I think it's really interesting to talk about. And then also, just that you get so much exposure to so many different aspects of medicine without being a clinician, right? So like
Mhm.
there are a lot of lay roles involved in the research and clinical experiences, and all of these kind of pieces have to come together to achieve the outcome. I think it's also your perspective that you just shared, that you've worked on a lot of that takes a lot of work to put it all together, and a lot of times they do all that work and the trial doesn't even become a trial. So there's an immense amount of pressure and work that goes into research that we don't necessarily see from the patient side, but definitely has an impact on what we get as a community or a
Oh,
disease.
oh yeah, and then like as soon as like a patient has like an issue, I mean, like we hear about it like that. I mean, it's very fast, and then we're if we need an amendment, because sometimes, which means just changing the protocol, if it needs to be. Sometimes it's patient specific. Maybe there actually is an issue with the protocol. We change that up like very, very fast. But it's reviewed by a ton of people, and it's constantly looked at. I mean, constantly. I've adopted protocol. I'm on like, I stopped counting after 40. I'm on a lot of protocols. And I've adopted protocols from 2016. I think maybe the oldest is 2014. Now those ones, I don't think I've heard much about, but I do think, oh no, I take that back. I think the oldest one that I might have done an amendment on was one that was still running from 2022 or something like that. But yeah, they're like constantly being looked at. So that's why it's like it just constantly going
It's kind
under
of like a
edits.
living document.
Yeah, and not because it wasn't good before, but it's just like
Right.
sometimes you just find out things later on that they're like, oh, we have to change this. Or sometimes you're like, hey, this is going really well. We're going to add like another group. Like for example, in sarcoma, so many different subtypes. That sometimes they're like, hey, let's add this subtype to this study, and sometimes that happens. So there's a lot of different things that can happen with these.
Which for a rare diagnosis like DSRCT, we love to hear, going back and amending it to add a subtype, because that's often something that a rare sarcoma like our community would have happen, if there was good results in one particular type of cancer in the study, that they might want to consider letting our population in there. So I think also I heard you say in another podcast that I think is really important, is that kind of getting your own experiences medically and your interest in the patient experience kind of informs the work you do as a protocol writer, and that you implemented like a travel reimbursement, recognizing that one of the protocols that as written was going to be really financially taxing to stay compliant for the patient. So you were able to get some travel reimbursement built into the protocol. And I think, that stuck out to me also, because our community there's only a few facilities that really have expertise in treating DSRCT and have dedicated DSRCT programs. And so almost everyone has to travel for care. My son and I traveled to 6 different hospitals over the course of his almost 9 years of fighting. And so that is a huge issue, and it will. I mean, we had a trial that we were having great results in, but we were having to go from St. Louis to Houston every 6 weeks. And my son was healthy and feeling good, and he wanted to go to school. He didn't want to be in Houston every 6 weeks. So we pushed it out. And eventually we had a little progression that took us off trial. So like, essentially we were a patient 1 year, stable disease, on a phase 1 clinical trial that left the trial simply for that reason. So that really it was something that stuck out to me. If you want to maybe talk a little bit more about how patient experience can inform protocol design.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So basically before, just to kind of talk about what I was doing before as a medical writer, so I was a research coordinator, which meant that I carried out the protocol. So I would read whatever was given to me, and then I would do a lot. I would schedule patients. I would, see them, and we'd have the PI come and do whatever the PI needs to do. But we were trained to do like all the surveys, simple things like vital signs or blood draws and things like that. But basically, we were trying to make sure this protocol was carried out like it was supposed to. I mean, even running the samples sometimes, which meant just like you spin them down and you just like freeze them so you make sure they're stable, things like that. But there's a lot going on, and there's a lot going on for the patients. And I think there's a lot of studies I was on that gave me a lot of kind of insight. But I think the type of studies that gave me the most insight were the ones with the kids, the pediatric ones. And that's when you also get the caregiver and you get the kid. And you've got a lot of different ages in the room. And I'm talking kids. I think the youngest that we had on our study was 5 years old. That was not very common though, but then we had a kid that was like 5 years old. But they usually range from like 10 to 12. And I think part of, what stuck out to me was like we had to stay late or either come really early because kids were in school. And this was just a study about like asthma kind of thing, or I shouldn't say just, but it wasn't like, it wasn't oncology kind of study, but it was an intense study. I mean, these kids had to come in like every 2 weeks, and it was reasonable as to why they did, but it was just to keep them on track, was because it was important that they came in every 2 weeks for the things that we were doing, not just for our research, but for them too. Like it went both ways. It was really difficult. So then we had like visits that were purely like survey based and stuff. Obviously, moms or caregivers are like, oh, do we like have to come and do that? And it's like, like I hate telling you have to, because it's like you technically don't, but like, it was kind of hard. But even like trying to get around like different school times or things that happen with kids. So like my coordinators and I, because I was a senior coordinator at this point, I mean, we would stay late. We stayed till like 8 p.m. sometimes because we were finishing up certain visits. And I think what stuck out to me in that protocol, especially because since the caregivers had different perspective, they were able to kind of communicate, more than just if you're treating like a patient. And they were talking things about compensation actually didn't come up too often, but there were a lot of times where we did do travel reimbursement, and I was like noticing people were coming from like long ways. So this was in New York City, and coming from a different neighborhood was a lot. Like that was a lot for these parents, and their Uber rides were like really expensive. And I was just like, wow, that's crazy how expensive some of these like Uber rides can get. Because then also sometimes they don't want to take the train if they're going all the way back up, or if they're leaving late and things like that. And other things like these caregivers are like missing work too. And so then there was like compensation on top of that for like making sure that their like work payment was covered, but it didn't all really match up. And there's that. But I think it was kind of seeing the difficulty around the caregivers, especially getting their kids there, was it just kind of makes you look closer at the protocol, because then you're like, well, is there any way we can get around like certain things? And some things there were, and some things there weren't. And so something I started to notice was like, well, we have to find a common ground, because we have to make the research work, or it's not going to help people in the future. So you have to avoid deviations, but you also have to make things like easier for the caregivers or the patients if they're taking themselves, if they're like old enough. And so I think it was really that study that I started to think about the ease for these people. And so and it's not just me, like as a medical writer, the other medical writers are like this too, and the PAs are pretty involved in making sure that patients are able to get there. But yeah, I remember we were writing this one protocol, and since the patients are coming from out of states, if you like sarcoma, especially like all subtypes are like rare. Like sarcoma is rare, and then but it depends on your subtype. There's no like just you have sarcoma, you have a subtype. So it's like regardless, you're gonna have to be coming from out of state, or if you're in state, that's amazing. But it's also, you have to think about staying in like a large city. You have to think about like navigating a place you've never navigated before. And so, yeah, I just suggested that they provide travel reimbursement, which the PI was very like easy to say yes. Oh yeah, of course. But then
I'm sure that comes down to funding and whether or
oh
not
yeah,
there is
you have to ask the
funding
companies.
structure that can support that. So like, you
Yeah.
know, in our community, a lot of people travel to New York City to Memorial Sloan Kettering. So staying
Yeah.
on the Upper East Side of New York for months to try to receive care, especially when I was a 26-year-old single mother from Missouri, like we didn't have resources for that. And it took a lot to make it happen. And that's a common experience it's not that I'm sure that MSK and the team there would love to have the resources to be able to help patients be more consistent with and do more trials within the population because they have resources to support those trials. But all of that comes down to funding. So,
oh yeah, no, it all comes down to funding, because even running the studies themselves are like crazy expensive. These studies to run are just like, it's a lot. So then even when it comes down to, I don't want to say the last thing to think about is travel reimbursement, but it's definitely not one of the first things, because it's like the first thing is just making sure that it's up and running and people are able to go to it. But then when you come down to travel reimbursement, I think like whoever's doing the funding, sometimes they don't realize how important it is, because I think a lot of people get stuck making sure that the protocol and the science is there. But then I think, like, if you forget that who is actually providing the science, it's not, I mean, yes, it's the PIs and the study team technically, but like really it's the patients. It's their, specimens, like it's their, they're the ones providing things. And if you are unable to get those patients to make it to your study and stay in the study, then you're not going to have a working trial. You just won't. And there's even outside of sarcoma, and this is like an issue. There's studies are like, oh, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. It's like, I mean, maybe, but if you're already going to spend this much money on it, you might as well just provide like more, so you're actually going to get what you want out of it. I feel like that's much easier said than done, but it's just, I've seen a lot of studies not do well simply because it was really difficult for patients to make it, or the visits were really long, or so it's an issue with a lot of research studies, but especially with sarcoma, because it's really important sarcoma, because it's so rare people are going to be coming in and out of town anyways, versus like other studies that might be like breast cancer, prostate, where there's a lot of them. There's a lot of these studies. There's a lot more research out there. People feel a little bit more comfortable maybe going to the hospital they know in state rather than like flying out to MSK potentially, and yeah, staying somewhere like New York City, like forget it. Like, I mean, I lived there and I was like, forget it. Like, this is expensive. Yeah.
Well, so just to kind of switch gears on doing the podcast, what has it taught you? And maybe what are some of the things that you've learned talking to patients about their experiences that you were surprising or that you didn't expect?
Yeah. One of the first things is, so I was coming up with a script and I kind of wanted to have like a thread that kind of held them all together besides just the topic we were talking about. So I asked every single person, what's like advice you would give to either like a patient, like someone who's just diagnosed with sarcoma, or a caregiver, or et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't realize I went in with this frame of thought, but I did. I went with this frame of thought thinking I was going to get something really like tangible. Like, I don't know if I was thinking I can go to the store and buy something that was going to like help, but I think like I was thinking about that type of tangibility, something I could hold, like touch. And I remember the first person I interviewed said something along the lines of, you need hope. And I just thought, you know, okay. And I was thinking, that's not what I like. I'm serious. It's not what I expected. And I was just like, okay, but, and then I think I asked a follow-up question. This is one that hasn't been released yet. So it comes out later. I was like, is there anything like people can do today that's a little bit like easier, like a little more tangible? So I was just trying to think about like, you know, advice for my like self, like what would I like need to do? She's like, well, you know, you can go out and get these few things to like, you know, help with treatment and stuff, but what you really need to do is you need to be like hopeful. And she kept talking about it. And I was like, okay. So she really did mean that. So I was like, all right, well, let me see what the next people say. And honestly, as I kept interviewing people, everybody said the same version of this one thing. Sorry, that's my cat's feeder. Anyways, and I was really, it's kind of weird to say I was surprised because now I look back and it makes a lot of sense to me. But I think as somebody who was, well, you know, as I was once in the hospital and I was having a really hard time, that wasn't really part of like my vocabulary. No one ever told me, you know, like be hopeful. I think it's because of the situation. I was a little bit more, it was like more acute, but it wasn't something I was really thinking about. And so as everybody kept saying it, I think I honestly learned a bit about myself, which I was like, oh, like I was like not hopeful. And I think there was like hope given to me through people's actions and stuff. But I was like, oh, this is really a mindset. Because then I had run into other people who were not hopeful. And they weren't actively telling themselves like, I am not hopeful or like, you know, really, you know, negative things all the time. But it was more of the lack thereof. Because of these people who were talking about hope a lot. And these are people who had made it out of sarcoma. Even people who made it out of like recurrences. They were talking about it like as a very active choice. And it was just kind of interesting to hear, because then as I like kept talking to more people, even people I didn't like interview for the podcast, because again, we could only do 10 episodes, but I saw people who like didn't have that active hope, and I think it really makes a difference. And it's kind of interesting to see. It's a lot about mindset. I think also as a scientist, I was going to go in and like get something like very tangible, which it's not that having this active frame of thought isn't tangible, but I just, I think it's a harder thing for people to grasp because you have to be like in the situation. So anyways, that's kind of like the main thing I learned from it.
I think obviously that we've been connected for a few weeks now on social media, and you know, hope's kind of my thing.
Yeah.
And we say hope always a lot in this community because one, a lot of us are given a lot of information at diagnosis that is not at all hopeful. And we aren't offered a lot of hope. And so for us, my son and I, in our journey, hope was something we had to choose and fight for, and a mindset that we had to create, like you said. And I think I've heard in my research of hope, extensive research, I've heard kind of a great definition that I like that says that when you're thinking about something good happening, but you don't have any control over the outcome, that's positivity, right? That's optimism. But when you think positively about things that you can have agency and take action in, that is hope, like hope in what you can do. And sometimes there's lots of things in the moment that we have no control over. But I believe that there's always something that we can find agency over, even if it is our outlook, our mindset, the way we treat the next person that we run into, what we prioritize in our life in that moment. So we talk a lot in our group about hope and agency and hope not as just as a feeling, but as something that you can do actively. And I think that's a really cool thing that is a common thread in sarcoma. Obviously that makes sense to me because I've been in this world for a couple decades now. And I think it really resonates with me that it is kind of a through line that no matter what you're facing, no matter how bleak your prognosis or difficult the obstacles of getting treatment might be, the necessity of hope to keep pushing forward on this really difficult road, I think, is something we hear a lot and we talk about a lot in this group. One of the other things I've heard you talk a lot about is you've called the clinician-patient relationship, from hearing different stories, to be clinically critical in the sarcoma world. And I talk a lot about that too. So I wanted you to kind of share what you've learned about patient experiences and outcomes and how that relates to their relationship with the doctor.
Yeah. So I think what I'll start by doing is talk about like why it's clinically important for anybody, and then kind of go down to sarcoma, because sarcoma is very specific within this. So some of this might be kind of obvious, but I feel like until you say it, it's not said out loud. When you go in to see a doctor, the entire treatment is based on not you as a patient and not them as a doctor, but the relationship. Why? Is because what's really going on at the core of it is the doctor's assessing the patient to tell them what they need to go and do to get better. The patient is going to the doctor to say, I have X, Y, and Z symptoms. And just for all intents and purposes, let's assume the patient is, accurately describing all their symptoms. The doctor is, accurately assessing these things, et cetera. And if the communication is actually that, and they're being accurate and, whatever, it is then, like the doctor needs to keep tabs on this patient, but then the patient also needs to go off and do these things that the doctor says. So the doctor has to trust that you're going off and you're doing the things you say you're doing. And then the patient needs to trust that the doctor is giving them the best resources that doctor can provide. Does that differ from doctor to doctor? Yeah, absolutely. Just like it kind of differs between patients about how well they're able to keep up with their plan. And that can change for a lot of reasons. Or, their ability to keep up with the plan, just, like time-wise and things like that. And this can range from like very insignificant medical things to things all the way up to sarcoma. If you don't do those things on either side, and however it kind of comes out, there can be lack of trust on like both sides. And what does that mean? Maybe the doctor doesn't trust that the patient's telling like the entire story. That totally happens. That happens absolutely. It also happens that the patient's like, is the doctor really telling me everything that's going on? And like, I want to know everything that's going on. Does that happen? Yeah, totally. It happens all the time. But when people get the sensation that like something's off here, what happens? Go find another doctor, or, doctors, it's not very common that they can get rid of patients, but they can actually start that tension a little bit where they're like, I don't know, like something feels weird about this relationship. I don't know if they're actually taking the medication I told them to take. Are they taking something else? Or also could be just totally like, not like anybody's trying to withhold anything, but sometimes people go off and are, for example, taking herbs. They didn't even know they had a report. Taking multivitamins, they didn't know they had a report. And so then the doctor's like, I don't know what's going on here. And it's not, it doesn't always start by, people thinking, is this person telling me the truth? It can be that, but I think it's really ultimately like, is this person giving me all the information I need to do my job? And so why is that really important in something like sarcoma and like other like rare cancer? Oh, go ahead.
Let me jump in right there and I want to pause just because I want to call out something that you said, that a lot of times when doctors maybe lose that trust or don't have confidence in that relationship, you said, but usually they won't fire you. And I think that's an important thing to say. The doctor is not going to fire you as a patient. They're just going to treat you differently. Mm-hmm. It's just going to impact the way that you guys relate and the way that they're able to care for you. But very rarely will a doctor who doesn't feel good about the relationship that they have with you come and say, you know what, this isn't working out. You should probably find someone else. Now, a lot of times patients are going to have to be the one to do that. If the relationship's not working, you're going to have to break up. They're not going to break up with you, but they will. If the relationship's not working, that's also going to impact the way that your care and the way that you guys can work together to have the best care.
Yeah. And there are times where they will suggest you go see somebody else, but that's more if it's like outside their specialty or something like that. So it's a little bit of a different scenario. But yeah, it is kind of interesting because it is there's almost like there's a vetting process that is really heavy on the patient side that it can become really difficult. Even me as a patient that's like not going through any sort of like cancer treatment or anything like that, even just like my basic day-to-day stuff, I have to do a lot of vetting that I kind of wish I didn't have to do. And again, it's not like I'm not trying to put down physicians or anything like that. I'm just saying that there is like this weird imbalance sometimes that can happen because you're like, I don't know what I should know. And then you go to somebody else and they're like, oh, you went and saw, that's what they gave you. And you're like, I don't know, like I was just doing what I was told. And you find out through, a lot of different doctors, everybody's got different opinions because that's why they say medicine's an art, And so I think when it comes down to like a really rare cancer, it's like there's already so many different like things that are going on, but then you're learning about something that like most people don't even know that much about. So then you're like, well, who's really the expert here? And it's like, well, there's only a certain level of expertise because we don't really like know a whole bunch. And so then creating that type of trust where I think, also part of hope is like you want to be hopeful about the treatment, but sometimes the reason why it can be so hard is because especially with a lot of people who are stepping into this territory, they have like they didn't have foundational knowledge about it before until they got diagnosed. They're trying to figure out and organize all of these thoughts and like seeing, these doctors and thinking, am I actually seeing the best person for me? Because like, does this person actually know what they're talking about? And it's like, honestly, they're talking to the best that they can. And sometimes that's really what there is. And so that's why it ends up becoming so built on the relationship, is because sometimes you just have to trust that people are doing the best they can. And it's really like less than perfect. And, because and that goes on both sides too. But I think that's what's really, really difficult. And so there's a huge amount of expectations, I think, on both sides to ensure that relationship has a lot of trust. So you can kind of figure it out together. Now, not everybody thinks about it like that. There's, a lot of patients who think like there's a lot of pressure on the doctors to be, X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of doctors who think, well, the patients didn't say this or that, the other thing. And it's like, yeah, I can point fingers all day, but it's just like, it's such an uncomfortable experience if you don't have that type of like trust. And have you ever thought about, a doctor you've seen in the past, whether it was for sarcoma or not, where you're just like, oh my God, I have to go see that today. Or, it happens on the other side too. Like, it makes like the entire experience uncomfortable when you're walking in. And then it's like, do you really want to tell that person, like a vulnerable, like side effect you had, like something like, like diarrhea or something like that, or incontinence, something like that. No, you don't want to tell them that. Like, it's an uncomfortable experience. And I think then those little things like add up and they lead to like, not fully disclosed relationships. So then how does that affect treatment? Well, then, the patient might not be getting the treatment they need or the support systems or something like that. Or later on, if they say something like, does the doctor then think, oh, well, they didn't tell me before, maybe they were withholding? And it's like, yeah, maybe they were really uncomfortable and now they're just trying to come out of the shell a little bit, because there's also that effect too, where, people are going to see doctors and it's not that they don't trust the other person because of them. It's because it's just inherently a really difficult situation. And so there's also this thing is like, sometimes you have to give people the benefit of the doubt, but then you also have to know when to rip the Band-Aid off. So it's kind of like this weird balance I think you have to keep, but it's really just a domino effect in my eyes, but it can get really complicated. But yeah, I wish we knew more about sarcoma, and there's only a certain like level of expertise because it's simply just the limit of like what we currently know.
One of the things we talk a lot about, I mean, obviously with sarcoma, especially this sarcoma, but most sarcomas, you're seeking out certain specialists. And so you maybe aren't going to have they're not maybe going to be the person you click with, but they're the expert, right?
Yeah.
Which then comes the importance of the care coordinators, the nurse practitioners, the physician's assistants. So many of those people for me were my people, right? Because they're building those relationships. And I talk to a lot of patients early in their journey about letting the care teams know you, like letting them know you as more than just a patient. Show the pictures of what you guys did last weekend as a family. Put pictures up after surgery that shows, like I had Cole's soccer pictures and him with his friends and on the swim team when he was in his bed recovering from his surgery, because I wanted those doctors to see what he looked like, who he was.
Yeah.
This is the life that we're fighting to get back to. And I think allowing people to know us helped bring them on our team more. It helped develop that connection and relationship that really does impact the care that you get and how confident you feel in the care that you get, which are two important things, right? You not only feel that you're getting good care, but that you feel confident, like you said, that this is also the best possible, the right care. And I think I'm sure you've heard of Dr. Pete Anderson if you talk to people in the sarcoma world. Yes. And he's kind of a hero in our community and does a lot of wonderful things for all of us. And my son, when his cancer recurred, we were referred to Dr. Anderson from MSK. So that was when we started seeing him. And then from that point on, he was what I called our quarterback. So he was the one that I could entrust to kind of carry the ball down the field for us. Now, the reason, and I'm like a type A kind of control freak, the reason I could let him be the quarterback is because we had that trusting relationship, but I also knew that he trusted me. Yeah. And that he gave me a voice. I could go to him and send him an article, and I still can to this day, email him an article and be like, what do you think about this? Or what does this mean? Or how could this work? How could we apply this for us? And he was very encouraging of that, which gave me the ability to have that level of connection. So I think having those relationships can be so critical, not just having someone that you can call when things go really bad, but or having somebody who can be kind of your grounding person. But the challenge of that is also that they are literally just people. And I think it's easy to look at them because they're doctors and they're so accomplished and they've had so much schooling and they're so smart that they are some level above the same humans that we are, that have families they go home to and don't know what they're going to eat for dinner tonight and missed their daughter's recital and now their wife's mad at them. And like all of those things are true for their lives too. So keeping that in mind for me really helped me to build relationships with them and see them. Like, as much as we talk about the need, and it's absolutely, I think, important to have these conversations and put it out into the universe that this is a thing, right? But to me, I think it's not only as critical for us to have a good relationship with them, but for them to feel like they have a good relationship with us, right? So like, to feel confident that we care about them as a person too, right? I would never, if I blew up a doctor in the middle of the night, which there were times I did, I was always very apologetic. I was always, I would do a few extra things to make up for it. I always tell people, you bring nurse bait, take candy to the hospital with you so that people know that you care about them too. And that's part of building those relationships. So I think that the work that you do really highlights how important that is. And having a podcast that can have these conversations to really bring awareness to these issues is really important for our community, because we don't talk about them happening. It's easy to act like it's not a thing. And then a patient who's having a relationship conflict with their doctor feels like something's wrong with them because they can't get along with this person that they need. And it's like, that's just actually humans doing human things.
Yeah, especially when you're new to it, and interacting with, because like you said, it's not just a doctor, you have like a whole team, and like knowing that you can share like photos of what you did that weekend and stuff. I think that's a really good point. It's like, even when I worked as like a researcher, I tend to have I had much better relationships with people who were more open to sharing that kind of stuff. Obviously, you don't share things you're not comfortable with, but like then when there's like I remember specifically a mom comes to mind who would always talk about her and her son and her other kids would go to Coney Island a lot during the summertime. And I remember we would just talk about Coney Island. Coney Island's kind of a weird place. And so we would just kind of like laugh about it because it was just like, they're just things that we could relate to about it. Versus I think some other families were not as open. And I think what's interesting is you don't realize the kind of information you're sharing is actually really helpful to the care team about your kid or yourself when you share those moments. So like, for example, if you're sharing a lot that like your kid does soccer, it shows what they're able to do physically before. And that actually gives like a lot of context versus like, if you say, oh, well, my kid does like me, like a lot of art, they might go, were they around any like certain chemicals or something? Like it might actually provide information because you might not be like in it, not that you need to be, but there might be things you might not be thinking about that have like added up. Not that we know like certain causes. I'm just saying in general, like it might provide information that you would not thought was even information to begin with for these people. So, and then also then there's the other part of forming a relationship where it's like, it's going to be a long-term thing. So, you know, you might as well up the note you did over the weekend because you're going to see them the next week and stuff. So you might
as well learn how many kids they have and what their wives or what their life is about too. It's just so you have something to talk about besides yourself and your cancer, right?
Yeah.
I really think that I want to kind of wrap it up and open up to the group, but I wanted to ask you if there's any other kind of recurring insights or themes that you've noticed from the different interviews you've done in the sarcoma community.
Yeah, actually, as I was answering this question before, I had actually thought of something else. It's related to hope. And it's interesting, I kind of only think about this now. So a little context, when I ended up getting really sick, right before that, I actually, I grew up going to Catholic school and was raised very like intense Catholic. I'm not Catholic anymore. I just want to be very clear. I'm spiritual in a different sense, but I remember I was pretty. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a nun. Like I was very committed. And art school was not really, not a lot of nuns in art school. I will say that. But when I ended up getting ARDS and I was in the hospital, I not only did I not have like hope afterwards, I actually came across this not so long ago. I did a painting and it was of me when I was in a coma, and I don't know if I was like in water or something, but I had like my hand up and I painted a rosary that broke. And I remember, especially when you're young, you don't really think about the reasons why you're thinking about certain things. But at that point I was really frustrated because I had a lot of really dark dreams when I was in a coma. Yes, you like dream when you're in a coma. It's really weird. Your body knows when there's like, still has like this weird circadian rhythm. And I remember just, not only did I have like a bad time because I was, dying like physically, but I didn't have a certain amount of care that a lot of other people had, like within like my actual like inner circle. So I think that was really hard for me. And that's why I think the care team at the hospital was really important to me. And so there was like many years where I was like, I really didn't like spirituality, religion. I mean, like just, I didn't even like the idea of it because I think it made me feel uncomfortable. That I have a lot of reasons why I won't get into. All of it had to do with my experience in the hospital. And as I was talking to people, a lot of people who are on the podcast are survivors of sarcoma, except we have one person who's actively going through treatment right now. And I didn't make it that way. It was just people who are actively going through it, I think either didn't want to do it or it was just too, it just didn't work out. Every single one of them, whether it was like Christianity or like Reiki and like that type of spirituality kind of stuff, no matter what, everybody had something to turn to. And I think that is what the tangible thing was. It's like everybody was talking about hope. And so that was a very kind of like broad way of talking about it. And I feel weird talking about spirituality because that's kind of like a new thing for me. But it is something that like a lot of people turn to. And I was like, I think that is, I'm still registering that because that surprises me, because that's something I was just like, whatever, like it's science here is the thing that helped me. And, but when I really look back, there were other things that helped me. But that's another like pattern that I've seen very heavily throughout. And again, it doesn't matter what kind. It just matters if it works for you. If it works for you, if you believe it, if it's something you can keep up with, et cetera, whatever. Just don't worry about what other people think. Just, do what works for you. But that's a really common theme. So.
Well, thank you. And before we get too far along or into the period, we've gone definitely over our hour, but I really have enjoyed talking to you. So kind of to wrap up what we've been talking about, one of the last questions I had sent you was that I wanted to kind of give you an opportunity to get you to know more about DSRCT and to get to know our community here. So did you have any questions kind of to open up the conversation? Do you have any questions for the group? And then we'll see if the group has any questions for you.
Yeah, no, I think like my broader thing, and this is very much on the nose of like my research path, but I know like it's really hard to find research studies anyways if you have sarcoma, because finding your specific subtype is like a whole nother like ballpark. But like I was wondering if anybody here has like very specific like anecdotes or stories of trying to find like clinical research studies, because even finding one doesn't even mean it's like right for you, because you also have to find one that matches like your time and stuff like that. And I'm just like wondering how people are able to go about that, because I'm not on that side. Like it's I can't really fathom how difficult that can be. So that was like the first thing I kind of wondered.
Well, and I'll open it up to the group, guys, if you want to jump in, but feel free to raise your hand physically or visually. Let me change my screen. But I will say that I think that it's a common experience that a lot of people in DSRCT are going to be, what they get as their care is going to be in a clinical trial of some way, because it's such a rare disease. A lot of the research that's being done at MSK is under the umbrella of a clinical trial. So Emily Slotkin is treating a lot of patients on a clinical trial. A lot of when my son went to MD Anderson and was treated by Pete Anderson and Andrea Hayes Jordan, that was on a clinical trial. So as the patient though, and the caregiver, we didn't really, that was just like the care, we didn't really think of it as like we're in a clinical trial. Now later, when the trial I told you it was a T-cell study, it was very new immunotherapy at that time, that very much was a trial experience. But a lot of the patients in our group are probably been on multiple trials that they maybe didn't even have awareness of. Eva?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for everybody here, it's just like we are trying to found as much as possible, especially when you are not from the USA. We are based in Czech Republic, and my brother as a patient. And yeah, it's kind of like if you have a system where the doctors can be amazing, but they still have kind of like the post-communism mentality. So what is not in the guidelines kind of doesn't exist, because it's very hard to go through the system and paperwork and everything. Then you need to step up and you need to find the way how to get the consults, at least like the opinion from Pete or anywhere else, because when your doctor, which actually is really top on the sarcoma in Europe, and she runs few clinical trials by herself, will gonna tell you that we didn't consult with anybody because we have guidelines here from the European Union and that's it. Why we should like try to find out something else, because nobody actually has like receipt or protocol, what should we do next? then it's for me like very, I don't have polite words, sorry. But yeah, that's kind of like that. So then it's much harder to approach the doctors, because it, for me, actually, from my point of view right now, it doesn't matter how nice they are to you or how cocky they are, or if I trust them or if I don't trust them. Even if their opinion will gonna be like, you are trying to commit a suicide with this, but technically we can do it, and that's your decision, I'm okay with that. So that's one part. And another part, I'm not sure if like anybody has to be like the spiritual being in the terms of hope or anything, because I just think that sometimes the research and the science is the God for us. So maybe we are not looking for like something higher or some deeper meaning or something like that. We are just hoping and trusting that we have to move 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and something will gonna work out, and they will gonna find out some new informations from the research and the trials that are already happening, and that this will gonna help. So for me, science is the God in here. That's it.
Thank you for that, Eva. And I relate to that a lot. I think there's a huge spectrum, and I don't think, as someone who, you know, had my own experiences with religion and spirituality growing up and have my own struggles with what that looks like for me, I do think my hope and my spirituality was definitely impacted by this experience. It changed the way I look at the world unequivocally. But I also have had a lot of conversations about hope over the years, and with a lot of different types of people. And I've had very interesting conversations on hope in the context of science. And we talk a lot about an uncertainty and in this, especially in this disease, and how there's so much that they really don't know. And you guys have all, if you've heard me even slightly, you've heard me say that in the unknown, there's hope, right? There's fear, but there's also hope. And so I have a good friend who's kind of much more of a sciencey nerd than me. And they came back and they're like, I've been thinking about your hope always stuff. And there's this concept in science called black matter or dark matter, which is like for all the things that you really can't understand, right? And you can't quantify right now, but they're still there. We know they're there, and we know that they have an impact. And so I find that concept to be kind of interesting when it comes to hope in the context of science. I don't know. Daphne, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I hear you, because I mean, like I write the protocols, so like I'm very ingrained in all the like the nitty gritty stuff. I think it can kind of take form in a lot of different ways. Kind of stripping away kind of like the niceness of hope for a second and talking about it a little bit more concretely. There's also hope in just actually trying to continuously find treatment. Like that's also an act that it has. And so it kind of sounds like a little woo-woo when you talk about it, you know, like higher level, because, you know, you're just trying to touch a lot of different types of examples. But there are people I've met who stop looking. Like, I mean, that happens, or and it can happen for a lot of different reasons, whether they don't have a lot of support or they don't have the I don't know. I'm trying not to say the hope to like find something, but there is something like that. Like, for example, I keep going back to my experience because it's just I think it's a good example of someone who didn't have hope. I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm just gonna walk. I remember just thinking like, okay, okay, and it also like I wasn't like in a position to like look up, you know, stuff. So I was just in a different situation. But I remember just being like accepting of it, and then I watched a movie and went to sleep. And again, very young too, but I've also seen that in patients who were, older and could look things up. And it's you know what, it's not a satisfying answer. It's like it feels like a nothing. And that's why I say I was really surprised, is because it felt so like untangible. Like there's not a lot of things you can read online, because people don't do research studies on this type of stuff. I mean, they do stuff, but it's not stuff that gets funding, because it's like less measurable. Like you can't get a lot of information out of it. So, and I think hindsight's 2022 is like, when you come out of it, it's like I was saying, it's a lot of these people who I was interviewing, they come out of it, they're able to look back. So, and then it's easier to talk about hope then, because they're like, well, okay, well, I got out of it. But I think it can take some different forms, but like, I agree. I mean, like I've been in that same mindset for a really long time. And, I'm just hearing about this kind of stuff. So it's just interesting to me, but yeah, that's kind of like my thoughts on it, even though it seems a little bit jumbled. So.
Thank you, though. Toy, did you have a question or comment for Daphne?
I do. First of all, Eva, my heart goes out to you and your brother. Keep hope alive, hope always, as I'm learning from Laura. I'm new to this, and Laura introduced herself to me through my granddaughter, Brooklyn's page the other day. I'm just getting into this, and I do have some questions. My first question to all of you all, because I am new to this, do the doctors talk to one another? So does Dr. Slotkins talk to Dr. Andrea Hayes-Dixon and the other doctors at MD? They all communicate like with new advances and things like that?
There's not like a meeting on a monthly basis or bi-monthly basis. I would love to build a symposium or some sort of research consortium where we fund having them meet on a regular basis. But sarcoma is a very, very small community. They go to the same conferences, they review each other's papers. Like it's a very small, and Daphne can speak to this as well. So they all know each other. How much they work together and talk to each other comes down to the same with patients. It's relationships. Okay. Whether or not they have a good relationship with each other, respect each other's research. There are people, every doctor has a different everybody has their own perspective. Some people have different approaches. So whether or not they get along personally and professionally has a lot to do with how much they communicate. But in general, there is not any coordinated effort for these people to all be talking to each other on a regular basis, which is why it's so important for us to be talking to each other.
Okay.
Daphne, do you want to jump in on that too?
Yeah. So actually, my perspective on it is, because it's such a small community, there's actually an advantage here. They actually do talk a lot. So like at SARC, which stands for Sarcoma Alliance for Research Through Collaboration, it's been around since 2003. It's not as well known to patients because it's not a patient-like geared research consortium, but it is all about this. So if you go onto their website, the people who are part of SARC, they're all the physicians from like all around what they call the expert sarcoma care centers, which experts in sarcoma are not a like real like license. Like you get your degree and you study oncology, and then you kind of pick whatever you want to do. It's the same for like prostate or breast. But what SARC does is they've come up with their own like list of how you can be considered an expert care center. You can go on to their website and you can look up a directory and you can actually type in where you're at, and it'll tell you what are like the closest things. Oh yeah, I can write the website. Here. I
don't even know. I can do that.
Like I've been on some of these calls. They talk and they know about each other, especially if you're like pretty well established in the community, which I don't want to say it's not hard to do, because I don't want to like dwindle it down, but like it's already so rare, and it's rare to like get interested in it, that they do. Like, yeah, people know Pete Anderson or Dr. Conrad, who was a part of SARC until he just retired, or people know about Dr. Pollock, or yeah, they get on calls a lot. And I mean, like they just had the SARC before ASCO meeting on May 29th, where like all these people went, pharma companies were there and stuff like that. So, and I will say from experience as someone who's been in a lot of different areas of medicine, this could be a bias, perspective, because I have gotten a lot more interested in sarcoma than other areas, but it seems like they're a lot more tight-knit than any other community I've worked in. So
also, though, keep in mind sarcoma is like 100 different subtypes. So there is maybe the people that are invested in treating and researching DSRCT specifically are maybe like a dozen people, like a very small group of people.
And I want to add light to something that you all said that was really, it's funny to me, because you were talking about trusting, having that relationship. So when Brooklyn was first diagnosed, she's in Jackson, Mississippi. I'm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, right next door. And we got the phone call that she had ovarian cancer. When she was in the hospital, they couldn't figure out what it was. And the first thing they said was ovarian cancer. So I jumped in my car immediately, and I'm driving to Jackson like a mad woman. We get over there. Her doctor is Dr. Cox. So I'm thinking, they're not about to tell us this baby has ovarian cancer. She's 15. They don't know what they're talking about. So I get there and I meet Dr. Cox. And I'm like, who are you? You're going to tell my daughter she has. So I meet Dr. Cox and I say, well, you all are in Jackson, Mississippi. I want to have her shipped to St. Jude. She says, well, I'm a St. Jude doctor. So I'm like, oh, really? She says, yes, I work at St. Jude on the weekend. She says, so if this baby needs to go to St. Jude, I can get her there. I say, you work at St. Jude? She said, yes, I do. So she gets her to St. Jude literally the next day. So I'm like, oh, okay. All right. I agree with you. Let's go on to St. Jude.
I think a lot of us have experiences where the right kind of synchronicities or just things that are unexplainable that people cross our path.
She gets to St. Jude, and then somehow I actually end up researching. I run into Gianna Saracola.
Yeah.
I
interviewed her. She's one of our, sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
I fall in love with Gianna, and then I meet Gianna's mom, Kim. Kim connects me with Dr. Andrea Hayes-Dixon. Now we've met with Dr. Andrea Hayes-Dixon, who says she will come to St. Jude and perform Brooklyn surgery. When you say hope always, I've had many a nights where I lay in bed and I cry because I just cannot imagine my 15-year-old granddaughter. But hope always is a slogan that I am literally trying to ingrain in my brain, because on those days that I want to cry, I have to keep hope always right here in the forefront of my brain, because these days just seem to run together, and this community is really helping me to embrace. Just so you all know, I have a binder right here that I have started because I'm trying to learn as much as I can and really wrap my brain around, and it's like things are just aligning, and the hope always. I go to Chat GPT, who are the experts, and who are the experts? Emily Slotkins, Dr. Andrea Hayes-Dixon, they're right there. So I'm connected. These groups are really helping me grow. The podcast, I have names written down, so I am listening and learning. I appreciate everything. So I don't have anything else to add. Oh, can you all tell me what PI and what AYA is?
AYA is the adolescent and young adult population. So that your granddaughter, I think, what is it, 15 to 30 or something like that?
15 to 39.
39.
Very bizarre age range, but that is what it is.
Because pediatrics would be little kids, right? And then most common population of cancers would be in people 40 plus, right? Or old, especially older adults in their 60s plus, because those cancers result from long-term genetic changes, right? So DSRCT is not that type of cancer. It's a single genetic mutation. So it can occur really at any point in someone's life, whether they're a child or an adult, but it is most common in the AYA population. And then Daphne, I'll let you take PI because that's your bag.
Oh, PI, yeah, it just stands for principal investigator. And what that means is a doctor is basically leading a study, meaning they've come up with an idea and they're looking over this study that may or may not help people. If it's active, there's a lot of research behind that. It will have some sort of positive effect. By the way, they don't just like let research studies through that they're like, we'll see what happens. That doesn't happen. But anyways, that's what PI stands for. If you end up doing a clinical research study, you might see it spelled out on the front of a cover letter. And if you start reading like research studies and they start saying principal investigator, you'll start kind of picking it up. But yeah, that's what that means.
Okay. Thank you all so much.
Every clinical trial will have a principal investigator, and they're kind of like maybe like the CEO or the president of it, because they're not the only one who's in charge. They're not even the only one credited with it, but they're the one that came up with the idea and kind of is in charge of making sure all the pieces come together. And they're usually the ones writing for grant funding and support as well. So say Dr. Pete Anderson has this great idea for a vaccine that he wants to develop targeting our mutation, which is a thing that's happening. It will take years of research to support that theory, and then finding a drug or developing a drug that he thinks will do that, and then putting all the pieces together to put that trial together. So he's the principal investigator of that trial. And that's kind of the trajectory of how that happens. Marisa, you had your hand up for a while. Did you want to jump in with a question or comment for Daphne? Or are you driving?
I can try. I'm driving. I'm in the mountains, so my signal is not fantastic. We have really bad wildfires around my house, so I have to go all the way around. But going back to the hope always and the spirituality, kind of like piggybacking off of Eva, but to add to that piece. So my husband is like, he's the jack of all trades, okay, I guess, because not only was he, I've always told people, the Billy Badass in the military, but he turned around and he also went into science. And so he's always been in the whole like nerd realm of science. And he told me the other day, this is exactly how he explained it. He has had a fall from grace. So he's always been the elite of the elite. So he was elite in athletics. He was elite in the military. He's been elite in science. And now he's like, look at me now. There's nothing wrong with him, obviously, but that's not what he thinks. And so, to me, the effect about the whole situation was he has learned to become more in his.
Oh, you're cutting out a little, and you're saying something. So start over again because it cut out. You said he has learned.
He has learned that spirituality actually matters to him in his own version, right? Like his own version. But he's really big in science. And but he has come to grasp that the hope has come from spirituality within him, and he has leaned on spirituality within the science community. So like Daphne said, you know, in your own version, right? Like, no one's going to tell you, but I think that that is key, and I'm happy that that was pinpointed in this whole situation, because hope has to show up for that individual going forward, I'm going to say. Otherwise, there's nothing there, because like my husband was able to give me the better words the other day, this is a really big fall from grace. I think for a lot of the community, because a lot of the community are elite, you know, like Joe is really good, and he is elite in nutrition and fitness and all those things. So this situation is truly a fall from grace, which means that we only have hope to go on.
Marisa, I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm really grateful to hear that Brandon's having those heavy conversations in his head and with you, because as hard as it is, I think, you know, we talk about all the time how important it can be. And I love, there's, you know, I talk about Viktor Frankl a lot, Man's Search for Meaning. And there's a quote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And I think that that's, for me, like a lot of what we go through in this community, whether the patient or the caregiver, is an impossible task. Like, there's no way to find a way to make this okay. But if you can find something within yourself that makes you have a reason to keep going despite all of this, not because of it, despite it, right? You know, and I kind of want to push back a little. Cole's always over my shoulder in these calls. And if you look at my kid in the picture behind me, that was taken in 2013. He was diagnosed in 2006. So that was 7 years after his diagnosis. That's not a fall from grace. You know, that's still elite. Like, he died elite.
That's what I told him. And I said, if you
Still
look
elite.
at everyone in this community, they're every single one of you guys is elite.
Remarkable is the word that I like to use. Daphne, I say often in our community, because there's so many, like, such a range of people and presentations. It's not all one thing. And I say all the time, like, the only thing I can see in my 20 years that all the patients have in common is they're all remarkable individuals. Sorry, Marisa, go on.
No, that's okay. I was like, you know, I said, if I were to look at any patterns, you know, everyone says that there's not really a pattern to DSRCT. I would have to say the biggest pattern that I've ever noticed out of all the DSRCT patients that I've ever had the pleasure of coming across, including in this group and including my husband, is unless we're talking about a super pediatric patient, a 5 to 8 to 9-year-old, I'm talking beyond that. The one pattern is they're all pretty much very active and maybe not 100% athletic, but they're not the people who just sit around and do nothing. You know, Dee is active, Joe is active, Cole was very active. You know, all of these people are very active, so I don't want to put it in a category of athletics. It's just that is the pattern, and so, like, I had to remind my husband. And I think that everyone comes to terms with things at their own time, obviously. However, I would have to say the biggest deal, and it's been forewarned, Laura forewarned me, Joe spoke about it, Dan spoke about it, that first year post-diagnosis is like the biggest deal of all time. Like, it really, like, I'm going to say makes or breaks you. You know, it doesn't truly break you, but you really figure out the big picture in all of this in that first year. So I'm coming up on Brandon's first year. So we're 2.5 months out. So yeah, for sure.
And I remember when you joined the group, I just want to point out, maybe because Toy's here, when you first joined the group, and you're a medical professional, you've done all the research, you've got a special needs child. So like, you were like, I'm all over this. I know my shit, right? I'm here, like, we're on it. And I was like, oh, you're a baby. You don't like, you new here. Like, just take it one step at a time. And you're like, no, we're good. And I feel like now you're like, okay, maybe there's some perspective that we have today that we didn't have then. And that's okay. That's the normal process. But I just wanted to call this out just because we've got someone brand new here today who is a baby.
Yes.
And it's okay that you are there in that process, because like, someday you will be down in a different place, you know, but when it's all very new, it's a lot. It's a lot to navigate.
It is a very big task. I will say my circumstances with having to walk this road with prior knowledge on top of medical knowledge, it has assisted me. I can't imagine what everyone else's road has been without the pieces that I have. So I would hate to, and I feel for everyone who's had to walk this road without just even a base, right? Like, everyone had to learn from scratch. And, you know, it's very humbling as you walk this road. I will say that. And learn all that you can, but you will never know it all. And that is a big thing that I've had to learn as well.
You guys, I think it's been a great call. The interview has gone so much longer than I thought. I want to say, Daphne, do you have any final words to kind of wrap up meeting our group, or if there's anyone else wants to put their hand up and get one last question in? Daphne?
Yeah, I'll just say real quick, just so I leave some time for any other questions, because I want to have people ask them if they want it. But first, thanks for letting me talk. I think like having subtype groups is really important in sarcoma. And so like, because even if you have sarcoma, I've heard from people is like, it's really, it makes a big difference to be able to go talk to somebody with their same subtype. So I think it's really important because they're all so very different. And I think that's, as per the reason I don't think people go into sarcoma a whole bunch of times is because it's a little like daunting how many subtypes there are, and there are how many types we don't even know that much about. And so I think it's really great that you'll meet about this, and just thanks for letting me talk about the work we're doing and stuff, because and I know you haven't really done this kind of interview before, but I think it went well. But anyways, I'll let you guys ask more questions if you want with the last few minutes we have.
Did anyone else have any questions for Daphne? And I just want to be sure that you all know, and I'm going to link it if I can do that really quick.
I just wanted to know, what time or when does your podcast, or where can we watch your podcast?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That's I should have even mentioned that before. So there's an episode that comes out every Monday. And we're going to have our 6th one come out this upcoming Monday. And it's going to go through, it was going to be the end of July, but we have the last one actually coming. I think we're doing 2 the last week of July or 1 at the first week of August, just because we got backed up. But it's on like YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts.